This is a picture of the farm in 1956 as seen from the school pasture where the milk cows and team are serenely grazing. Each of our pastures was named according to its location on the farm. A closer view of the farm buildings taken from what we call the Leto pasture, adjacent to the school pasture. Fall is here as the oat field is already in shocks, ready to be threshed, all of which will be shown later. This old farmhouse was brought to this knoll by teams of horses from a cyanide creek, which flowed from the Homestake mine. The creek itself was about a half a mile away. When a bay window was removed, cyanide sand poured to the ground. This old log cabin is probably where the first settlers lived. It had 2 small rooms and a tiny loft. Mother almost stepped on a rattler in its doorway, but she shot its head off with a .22 rifle. It has long since tumbled down. Snow has begun to fall gently, giving the farm a fairyland appearance. With a wood stove for heat, it was very cozy inside, just watching the snow blanket the farm in pristine white. Snow used to be much deeper. In 1977, Elsie and Bob were visiting with their motorhome this December, and Alvin had to shovel the snow before they could get out. Their Pinto was buried by the snow. As you can see, not just a few inches of snow, but several feet covered the ground. It took a bit of shoveling before Mother could venture out. This photo was taken in 1970 when Mel and Elsie are out for an exhilarating walk through the snow on a path that was a favorite at any time of year. This was several years later, and there just wasn't nearly as much snow, but still enough to make the earth clean. Mother used to cross-country ski in Finland as a girl, and I remember her wondering if she could still do it. Alvin had a pair of skis, and we urged her to try it. Sure enough, she could still do it. A picture of Mother and Dad taken in 1957. Mother used a cane for a while at one time, but her use of some folk medicines allowed her to eventually discard the cane. Mother loved her flowers. There were always flowers next to our back porch wall, California poppies especially, as they could seed themselves, and sometimes some petunias. The oleander was one of Mother's favorite plants. Every fall she would take it down the outside steps into the cellar, and every spring she would carry it back up to the light and the outdoors. This oleander was usually placed in a yard between these 2 trees. It always rewarded Mother for her tender care by blooming beautifully all summer long. All 4 of us attended the one-room school which had no electricity, no running water, and a coal-burning furnace. There were 2 little outhouses in the back, one for the boys, one for the girls. Imagine what it was like when you had to go when it was winter. We usually didn't have a rooster with our hens, but one year Mother and Dad had this cocky rooster. He would chase you and give you a painful peck on your legs. This cocky cock didn't seem to mind Mother, but he did have to show who was boss by flying to perch on the edge of the bucket Mother was holding, seeming to imply, "Feed me first." He really surprised Mother. Our chickens had free range and could roam as far as they pleased, but at feeding time they all ranged near the coop. But here, too, Ukkapoika was showing his spunk by crowing to his flock as if to say, "I'm the boss." Here the chickens had been given a new home. The grandchildren love to get among the chickens and try to catch one, usually unsuccessfully, but here Laura is at least trying her very best. The photographer must have been intrigued with chickens when even such a lousy picture is included. Perhaps it can be explained that Mother and Dad preferred Leghorns, as they considered them the best egg producers of white-shelled eggs, which most of their customers preferred. Water had to be carried to the chickens often twice a day. Dad saw to it that his chickens always had plenty of fresh water to drink. Another one of Dad's favorite chores was gathering the eggs twice a day in a large egg basket. Hoopy was often there to greet him when he returned from the hen house, and Dad was always ready to give him a pat. One summer, we even had a flock of Rhode Island Reds. These hens produced brown-shelled eggs, which some customers did prefer, but we had them for only one summer. Must have been sort of an experiment on the part of Mother and Dad, maybe. Our farm would not have been complete without milk cows, for another one of our livelihoods was selling cream. Here the cows are in the Leto pasture, where Bill is showing his baby daughter, Laura, one of the milk cows, who is calmly chewing her cud, not minding the intrusion at all. After the morning milking was finished, the cows were free to mosey along into the pasture, here into the Leto pasture on one bright sunny summer morning in 1958. Well, Laura saw a cow when she was a baby. This is quite a bit later when she's older, when she visited the cows in the pasture by herself. As seen here, our cows were really very docile and didn't mind a visitor on her back. An event that takes place each spring is the birth of calves. This happened to be a breech birth, where the calf is born feet first instead of head first and needs a great deal of help. Dad and Alvin are the midwives in this situation, helping the newborn to enter the world. Just a tug or two more, and everything should be fine. At last, the wee one has entered the outside world, and when the afterbirth has been removed, life will begin. A newborn seems so weak, but in no time at all it will be on its feet. It would be cruel to let the newborn calf just rest on the cold, snowy ground. So Alvin has put an old feed sack down for the wee one's resting place. The mother noses her newborn as Alvin watches to see that all goes well. The mother must clean her baby well so it can get up and suck milk to get strong. Milking time is almost here as the cows enter the barn and go to their own stanchions. Each cow knows her spot and goes right to it. All we have to do is close each stanchion, get a bucket and a stool, and start milking. Dad always claimed that milking was a form of relaxation. Yeah, for him maybe. We certainly didn't think so. It was a chore each morning and each night, a chore we could not skip. Resu and Matti always knew where to beg for that fresh, warm milk. They'd stand on their hind legs, waiting for Dad to squirt some milk directly at each one of them in turn. How they did lap it up. Not only did Resu and Matti know how to beg for milk, so did Mirri. Since Dad was busy with his beggars, Mirri would go to Alvin to beg for her milk. Here's Dad with two of his favorite things, his dog peacefully watching as Dad milks, while sitting on his favorite three-legged stool. Today it is at Mel's after Gary took it with him, cleaned it, and refinished it. Dad and Alvin did try milking by machine, only for a short period of time. Alvin is attaching the suction cups to the teats, which will milk all 4 teats at once. The milk traveled along pipes to another receptacle in the separator room. Penny was willing to try many of the farm's chores, and when visiting was even intrigued with the chore of milking, as she is doing here at the age of 10. In the separator room, the milk was separated into cream and skim milk. Most of the skim milk was fed to the calves and chickens after we had taken what we needed for our personal use. The cream was sold to customers or taken to the creamery. Calves were fed from buckets. They were taught to drink by having them suck our fingers, which had been dipped in the milk, and which we then lowered into the bucket. They learned quickly. We didn't need to use our fingers for maybe 2 or 3 tries before the calves caught on. As the calves grew, they were given their milk in stanchions outside. The calves knew where to come for their morning and evening milk, especially if we just called, "Caffy, Caffy." Mother is feeding some of the older calves who could drink their milk unhampered by the stanchions. They were fed this skim milk as long as we had plenty of it. They really thrived on this and became rather roly-poly. Actually, the chore of feeding the calves was mainly Alvin's responsibility. Calves soon learned which was the hand that fed them, so they were really quite easy to feed outside of the stanchions. After being fed and let out into the sunshine, the younger calves seemed to think it was better to have a siesta than to start jumping and racing immediately after being fed. Twin calves are a rarity among cattle, but this one year, one of our milk cows did have twins, and they actually looked very much alike. They were so cute. Cows and calves had to brave winters outside. They had to be kept well fed with the hay that had been stacked in the summer. What they didn't eat served as bedding when the cows were ready to lie down in the snow. Not only was hay fed to the cows, but corn stalks were an added treat. The cows really liked the stalks, a good change from hay. Here, Happy is thoroughly enjoying a corn stalk. Grass was often lush along the roadsides in summer, so one of our chores was to herd the cows along the road. Because fences could contain the cows from entering fields, it was a good time to catch up on reading, handwork, or just communing with nature. Hoopy was one of our best helpers, but when it was time to go home, he jumped into the back of the pickup. He not only helped herd, but Dad could send him into the pasture to get the cows just by yelling, "Go get the cows!" Soon the cows were headed for the barn, followed by Hoopy. We could not keep all the calves, and sometimes even a cow or 2, so they'd be taken to the Sturgis sales yard. Here they would be auctioned off to the highest bidder, sometimes for a good price, often just so-so. Sometimes a neighbor would give us a bum lamb or 2. A bum lamb is one whose mother will not accept it, especially if she has twins. She'll care for one, but not for 2, and sometimes the neighbor had too many bums. Bum lambs were started on a bottle with a nipple, but as they grew, they could be fed out of a container. How their cut-off stubby tails would wiggle and their noses push the bottle or pot, and if not hanging tightly, down it would go. These bum lambs never thought they'd had enough and were always eager for more. Here, Mother seems to be saying, "Enough is enough. Now go away and play." Wintertime meant getting hay from the stacks. Penny and Alvin are loading the hay rack in preparation for taking some hay to the cattle in the creek pasture, where they were eagerly waiting for feeding time. As has been seen in previous pictures, Penny was given the opportunity to try many kinds of farm chores, even to driving the tractor with the hay rack to feed the cattle. Here the cows are in our creek pasture, where they were fed their hay in the winter. This area was quite near the barn itself, and the water tank was nearby also. They did not venture out into the pastures. There was no food there. Not even the calves were allowed to stay inside, but had to brave the wintry weather outdoors. The hay not eaten made excellent bedding for the cows, for the ground was cold. Not only were the cattle fed hay and corn stalks, but there were feed troughs where Dad and Alvin would feed the cows some ground grain as a supplement to the hay. This helped keep the cows healthier than if fed just plain hay. What a boon the tractor was to the farmer. He didn't have to harness a team for getting chores done. Penny and her grandpa are ready to take off for some chores somewhere. There's always something to be done on a farm. In wintertime, especially, the tractor was an important implement on a farm as it was used for many tasks, and Dad and Alvin were happy to use it whenever possible. Here we are, still continuing with the tractor. This time, Penny and Hoopy, or Banu maybe, have joined Dad on his trek to some chore or another on the farm. Summertime brings different tasks such as making hay that is used in winter for feeding the animals. Laura, age 10, and Wayne, age 7, are showing how tall the alfalfa is already. Now that the alfalfa has been shown to be tall enough, it is time to start the haying season. The mower has been made ready, and Alvin is starting the cutting. The mowing is continued as we see a front view of the sickle and tractor. The sharp blades of the sickles cut the alfalfa cleanly, ready for the raking. One of Dad's favorite farm activities was to drive the team, made up of Susie and Jimmy, to rake the hay into bunches. It's a task Mel and Elsie did quite often also. The stacking was done with the farmhand, the implement used to gather the hay bunches from the field, and brought to the stack. Dad drove the farmhand. Laura and Alvin helped unload the hay onto the stack. The farmhand, with Dad's help, raised its load to the height of the stack. Alvin would hold the hay with his pitchfork as Dad backed the farmhand away from the stack. Each farmhand load from the field added to the stack, making it higher and higher. Haying like this could be done with just 2 people, not like before when we used to have to raise the hay by pulling the load with a stacker horse. The stacking continues, and the stack continues to get larger and larger with the added help of Wayne. This is a goodly amount of feed for the cattle come winter time. Summer work always had its mid-morning coffee time. This was brought to the field by whomever was at the house. Here, Dad and Alvin are also enjoying some homemade donuts, just made by Mom. Delicious. After all that mowing, raking, and stacking, the good-sized stack is complete. Proud helpers Laura and Wayne stand with their muumuu next to the finished stack. Even though Mother was a very good cook, she much preferred working outside and really enjoyed driving the team. She had just brought in a hay rack load of hay to be unloaded into the barn loft. Mother didn't help with the unloading of the hay. The men did that. This hay was for the winter feeding of the milk cows, which were usually kept in the barn overnight. The hay loft was often a very cozy hiding place for newborn kittens, too. How about a ride up high? When the haying was done, Alvin gave Laura and Wayne a ride up on the farmhand. "Look at us now," they seemed to be saying. Why not a picture of the controller of the farmhand from on high? So here we are, looking down at Alvin. Please let us down carefully, won't you? Raking with Susie and Jimmy eventually gave way to raking the hay side delivery style. This eliminated one step that had to be done with a team. Even stacking with a farmhand gave way to a newer method. Now the work was done with a machine called a baler. The tractor, however, is still a very important part of farming. A baler not only gathered the hay from the field, but made it into tightly packed rectangular bales. Nowadays, one sees huge cylindrical bales, often wrapped in white plastic. Times do change. Even baled hay needs to be stacked. They can't be left scattered all over the hayfield, as the alfalfa would be killed wherever a bale was left for a long period of time. Besides, they look a lot neater in stacks. However, the farmhand did not lose its place on the farm, as it was used to bring the bales in for stacking. These had to be stacked carefully, or just as with toy blocks, if not even, they could come tumbling down. Because bales were usually stacked near the feeding place, it took longer to bring the bales in for stacking. This gave Dad time to sit in contemplation as he waited. At last, this stack of bales is complete. I wonder if Wayne felt as though he were on top of the world as he perched at the top of the stack. Potato blossoms can be a lovely flower when blooming, as they were this year. That usually meant a good crop of potatoes for fall digging and to be put in the cellar for winter use. Mom was so proud of this field. She must have helped plant it, or she was looking forward to the first new potatoes to be dug, boiled, and served with that onion gravy that tastes so good. Grain harvesting time is getting near. Dad would keep checking his oat field almost daily to see if it was ready. The oats this year were unusually tall. A few weeks later, Alvin was checking the oat field again. Were the grains full enough for cutting? Could the field be ready for the binding to begin? Before combines, grain was cut with an implement called the binder, which cut the grain, tied the stalks into bundles, then dropped them in the field. Here, Uncle Bill is driving the tractor, and Dad is handling the binder. After these bundles had been dropped in the field, they had to be put up in shocks, as was seen in a photo at the beginning. Laura and Alvin are helping each other, so the bundles of oats will stand up. The bundles must be put up in shocks, as the grain could rot before the threshing was done. Vi, too, helped at times. Boy, did a sauna ever feel good after a hot, dusty day of shocking. Grains were separated from the straw with a threshing machine. Hay racks pulled by tractors and farmhands were used to bring the bundles from the fields to the thresher. A huge belt went from the threshing machine to the tractor on the left. This ran the thresher that separated the grain from the straw. No one was allowed near that fast-moving belt, as it could be very dangerous. The grain would flow from the smaller pipe into the granary, while the larger pipe discharged the straw. The straw stack was much larger, as the shocks had much more stem than grain. The binding and the thrashing eventually gave way to the combine, a machine that could cut the grain and separate it into straw, which remained on the field, and into the grain in one operation. When the combine's grain bin became full, a large truck would pull alongside and the grain emptied into the box. The truck hauled the grain to a granary near the barn. No more shocks or straw stacks. When the corn was ripe, Bill and Alvin are cutting it with a corn binder, which put the corn into bundles and dropped them as had the grain binder. Corn, however, was not thrashed. Alvin and Dad did the corn shocking. Those bundles were just too heavy for us girls, but we would take coffee and donuts out for the much appreciated coffee break. Shocking corn is very hard work. Most of the oats that were used for the cattle and chickens had to be ground. Here, Dad and Alvin have set up the grinder near the granary for easy access to the grain. When fed to the hens, the ground grain was mixed with the liquid, often the skim milk, to make a mash. The cows had the grain as is from the feed trough as seen in an earlier picture. I wonder if there ever was a time that we didn't have a collie mutt on the farm. Here, either Panu or Hoopy is having quite a stretch after someone awakened it from a nap. As was seen in the picture of herding cows, Panu was a jumper. He also loved to jump over the gate into the yard, which was actually forbidden area for him. Ressu was one of our favorite cats. He spent much of his time around or in the house, except at milking time. In summer, he was often on a lawn chair, playing with a ball. After some playing, it was time for a rest. One of Ressu's favorite places was to remain in the lawn chair. We didn't have the heart to chase him off when we were ready to sit. Farms always have their kittens, and eventually they left the barn loft. When they were old enough, we often brought them up to the house, but not into. Here, Mikko was a very lovable kitten. Ressu was a good indoor cat, too. Father would let him in the first thing in the morning and give him a latte. Mirri and Ressu were having a good time on the living room floor in this picture. Obviously a contrived picture, right? Elsie's old doll made such a cozy resting place for a couple of cute kittens. Dad enjoyed the wrens. He built a little birdhouse in the replica of a farm shed and hung it on a tree in the yard. Each summer, a pair of wrens built their nest in it. If one looks closely, one can see a hungry baby wren eagerly poking his head from the nest to get his bit of food. Both father and mother wren were kept busy feeding their babies. I wonder if Mother was not to be outdone by Dad in his birdhouse. She rigged up a rather unconventional bird bath, a garbage can lid. An English sparrow seemed to be enjoying it. Laura, Wayne on his mother's lap, and Penny had a surprise visit from Santa while at the farm one Christmas. Santa is wearing an overcoat made from horsehide. It was not only warm, but heavy. Here, a table at the farm is laden with gifts. All that is needed is for someone to start opening some of them. At last, the opening of those gifts has begun. Dad and Alvin are busily engaged in tearing off the wrappings to find out what Santa may have brought them. Christmas Eve always meant a sauna, after which we would have our rice puro served with sugar, cinnamon, and milk, and sometimes baked with raisins. The partakers are Dad, Alvin, and Mom. One of Mother's specialties, only served at Christmas time, were her flaky tarts with prune centers. They were the best treat of all, being enjoyed here by Mom, Elsie, Vi, Dad, behind the candelabra, Alvin, and looks like Bill, but where are the rest of his family? Eager and ready to sit down for a festive Christmas Eve snack were Dad, Penny, Alvin, Elsie, and Mom in 1961. The table was laden with all kinds of goodies to eat. Mother could be saying, "You look mighty sharp for an old man." Dad had put on the new hat Bob and Elsie had just given him. The shirt was new, too. If the sauna had not been warmed, taking a bath at the farm in the earlier days was quite different. Wayne is getting his in a laundry tub set in front of the open oven door so he wouldn't get too cold. He doesn't seem to mind it at all.